Now, it did seem that there was a political consensus around coronavirus even a few weeks ago, but as you just saw with that last interview, it's starting to crack with more criticism being made of the government by opposition parties. We can now talk to the acting leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, who joins us now. Thank you for being on the programme. Boris Johnson returning to work tomorrow. Are you pleased to see him back?
Absolutely. We've all been wishing him well throughout this, him and his family, and it will be good to see him back in Downing Street and hopefully in charge of this situation. We've got to work together. Liberal Democrats from the start have been constructive and supportive of the government experts, particularly the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor, and I'm sure Boris Johnson will be asking them for advice as soon as he gets back.
I think that's the point, isn't it? There's going to be some really difficult decisions that the Prime Minister will need to make in the coming days and weeks of being back in office. What plan do you see for loosening the lockdown?
Well, we've got to ensure that the testing, the tracing, and indeed the isolation plan is in place. People will need to be tested to see whether they've got the virus before they can go back to work. And those who test positive, there's got to be a very, very substantial investment in being able to trace the people that they've been in contact with in the previous days, and then to support people who then have to go into isolation, and indeed people who are very vulnerable who have to stay in isolation and not leave their homes. So quite a complicated package, and Liberal Democrats are concerned that we're way behind on testing and we're not investing enough in tracing so we can really have a proper community-led testing, tracing and isolation strategy.
It's interesting to hear about the emphasis on tracing, on contact tracing, effectively tracking down people who may have been in contact with an infectious person. Now, in South Korea, that's been some pretty rigorous controls. It's been looking at people's credit card transactions, even CCTV. It could mean tracking people's movements. I mean, the Liberal Democrats are traditionally the party of civil liberties. Do you have any concerns about this kind of unprecedented surveillance?
Of course we do. We've got to get the balance right. But actually in South Korea and Germany, they've been recruiting and training lots of individual people to do the tracing. So it's not just been central government by any stretch of the imagination. It's been at the local level, community level, and it's been human to human that's actually been the core of their strategy. There may well be an ability to use some technology to support that effort, but unless you've got the people in place, unless you're doing it at the community level, I don't think tracing can be effective. So we will need to see if technology can assist, but I don't think we need to put huge powers in the hands of central state. I think we can adopt an approach which actually other countries are adopting too.
I believe we could go back to Ed Davey, who we had those technical issues with earlier. It's one of the challenges of broadcasting in these socially distanced times. Normally you'd be here in the studio opposite me, but you're back now, so thank you for sticking with us. The question that I asked just before we got cut off was about whether or not companies registered in tax havens should be eligible for government support.
No, they shouldn't. We've seen Denmark, Poland and France say that the government support they're giving to businesses should not be going to those businesses who've gone offshore. Now, if they come back onshore and start paying their taxes like all the other businesses, the businesses who do pay their taxes, then of course they'd be eligible for that support. Let's remember, we've got to get the money to the frontline workers, the NHS workers, the care workers, and we've all seen how poorly paid some of the care workers are. And if we're going to actually build a fairer society out of this, so we get the money to those people who need it in our public services, as Liberal Democrats believe, a much more progressive approach than we've seen in recent years, then we can't have these companies going offshore, not paying their taxes and getting taxpayer support. That would be totally wrong.
You mentioned there about the pay for people like care workers. Do you think that those in public services, NHS workers, those in care homes should be given a pay rise as well?
Well, I certainly think so. I mean, Liberal Democrats have argued that if you look at what our soldiers get on the front line when they're in action and risking their lives, they get an operational allowance every day. And I think the fact that our care workers, our health workers are risking their lives suggests that maybe they should get something like that. And we've been arguing for a support package for NHS workers and care workers, obviously top priority, more protective equipment and help for them in doing their job at the moment. But also, I do think they should get a better death in service package, for example, and certainly some sort of acknowledgement on pay. And longer term, I mean, I do agree with Keir Starmer on this. I mean, we're going to have a progressive society and a fairer society. We've got to start treating care workers and people like that, frontline workers, far better than we've been doing.
Now, something else that you've been calling for is a public inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic. Now, some people might hear that and think, hang on a minute, we are in the middle of perhaps the biggest crisis since the world wars. Are you just playing politics by calling for something that will happen in the future?
Not at all. When I asked Dominic Raab this at the first virtual PMQs, I was surprised that he refused to commit. I thought it was going to be a very easy question for him, because it would be absurd if we didn't have an independent public inquiry surely into this, so we can learn the lessons, so we can get to the truth, and so we can see why we appear to have handled this less well than other countries. And we've had inquiries in other issues over the years. I mean, the most obvious one was back in 2005 when there was an outbreak of E. coli in South Wales. Hugh Pennington, the Professor of Pennington, had that inquiry. We've had inquiries into the Iraq War with the Chilcot inquiry and so on. So it would be completely wrong not to have an inquiry. Let's remember that lots of people want to ask many questions and they're not getting answered at the moment. Why have the care sector been treated almost as second class, though the care workers haven't had the protective equipment and haven't been even tested? And when we are seeing the appalling death rate with over 20,000 dying in our hospitals, an FT analysis of ONS figures yesterday suggested that if you add in those dying in hospices, in the community, and in care homes, we could be looking at over 40,000 deaths already. This is a national calamity. And that's why I just want the government to pre-commit now, so that it will say that after this is all over, there will be an inquiry. I think that's quite an easy question for them to answer.
OK, just finally, Labour's got a new leader, Keir Starmer, the opportunity to create a fresh team around him, elected with a big new mandate. In contrast, the Lib Dems have suspended their leadership contest until 2021. Do you feel that the Lib Dems are struggling for relevance at the minute?
Well, first of all, can I congratulate Keir Starmer? I think he had a very good first PMQs. And the Liberal Democrats are going to be back. We're going to develop our vision again. We're going to learn the lessons from what was a disappointing general election. But we have put the national interest first. We cancelled our spring conference, which is one of our major annual political platforms. And we've said from the start that we want to be supportive of the government advice, the expert advice. And we've been doing that. Put the national interest first. I don't think this is a time for party politics. But when this is all over, we will be getting a very clear, strong message on everything from climate change to improvements in the care sector, which we're learning an awful lot, and also a far fairer society. I think people have been surprised at the inequalities that have been shown through this crisis, and I hope we can therefore build on that and actually really have a much better outcome as a result of this crisis, both tackling the problems specific to the crisis, but building a much fairer, much greener society afterwards.